Look who we have here. And who might you be, Miss Technician? A coffee runner for the real soldiers?" The voice cut through the air like a blade scraping metal. Naomi Rivers stood at the control console, her fingers hovering over the keys that commanded a $15 million reconnaissance drone flying over contested waters. She didn't flinch, didn't react to the laughter that erupted around her. 8 Navy SEALs filled the narrow corridor outside the UAV control room, their broad shoulders and cocky grins exuding the confidence of men who believed they owned the world. At the center of them stood Admiral Hayes, his silver eagles gleaming like symbols of untouchable authority. His arms were crossed, his posture rigid with the kind of self-assurance that only the most seasoned officers could afford. But Naomi wasn't here to play their games. The laughter died down as Hayes took a step closer. His cologne and arrogance filled the cramped room. The rest of his team exchanged glances behind him, eager to see her squirm, to put the coffee girl in her place. "I asked you a question, miss," Hayes said, his voice dropping lower, mockingly theatrical. "Rank. What's your rank?" Naomi turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes with a calmness that seemed almost dangerous. Her expression never shifted, her posture never wavered. But when she spoke, her voice was a steady force that sliced through the tension. "Higher than yours, sir. You just don't know it yet." The room fell silent. The confident laughter that had filled the air moments before came to an abrupt halt. Someone coughed. A boot scuffed the floor. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than ever. Hayes stood there, his smirk faltering for just a second, before he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming sound, one that invited the others to join in. And they did, nervously at first, but the laughter grew louder, more eager, until they were all part of the joke. "Cute," Hayes muttered, leaning against the doorframe, clearly enjoying himself. "Maybe I'll give you a uniform after you polish my boots." Naomi didn't respond. She simply returned her focus to the screen in front of her, fingers dancing over the keys. Every move was deliberate, calculated, and as the SEALs slowly filed out, their laughter still echoing down the hall, one person in the room was watching her intently. Master Chief Brooks, a man with decades of service who'd seen enough to recognize when things weren't as they seemed. His eyes narrowed as he studied her. Something was different about Naomi Rivers. And in a room full of hardened soldiers, she was the one who wasn't trembling. Master Chief Brooks couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the last of the SEALs shuffled out of the room, their laughter fading, he remained, watching Naomi as she returned to her work. She hadn't flinched, hadn't hesitated, and it made him wonder. Brooks had been in the Navy long enough to know the difference between civilians who fumbled under pressure and operators who moved with purpose. Naomi didn't fit the mold. Her hands were steady on the keyboard, typing in a rhythm that didn't scream newbie. No, this was someone who knew their way around a system. A system, Brooks was sure, that not just anyone could access. He caught a glimpse of her grip on the tablet. 3 fingers at the base, thumb and index, supporting the edge in a way that wasn't standard for anyone outside of advanced tactical schools. That wasn't how civilians gripped equipment. Hell, it wasn't how most Navy personnel handled gear. He watched her input a sequence of commands with practiced precision, something that should have taken most operators a good 5 minutes to accomplish. But Naomi, she did it in under 10 seconds. No hesitation. No second-guessing. Admiral Hayes hadn't noticed, but Brooks did. He also noticed the subtle way Naomi never looked up when she saved her work. It was like she already knew the exact sequence of steps, like this was second nature. A chill crept down his spine. Naomi had made it clear, without ever raising her voice, that she was untouchable. Her response to Hayes hadn't been a challenge. It had been a declaration. The more he watched, the more his instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just some tech support contractor who got hired because she had the right connections. There was something deeper to her, something dangerous. As if sensing the way of his gaze, Naomi turned just enough for him to see her eyes. They were cool, calculating, almost icy, but behind them was a flicker of something that Brooks couldn't quite place. Was it fear? No, it wasn't fear. It was certainty. She was in control. And in this world, that meant more than anything. And that was the problem. Miss Consultant. Hayes called from the doorway, his tone still dripping with condescension. "You got about 30 seconds to explain what a tech support girl is doing with access to my UAV systems." Naomi stood, her movement economical, efficient, every muscle, every step perfectly in sync. As she folded her hands behind her back, they settled into a position that was exactly regulation. Not close enough, not sort of, but exactly as it was drilled into the Navy's best. At ease, poised, and unshakable. Naomi's words were quiet, deliberate, like she was speaking to a child who didn't understand the game he was playing. "Sir, I'm a consultant, but you're right about one thing." She stepped forward, meeting Hayes' gaze without flinching. "I've been given access to your systems, and I'm here to make sure you're not the one who's going to screw this up." The silence that followed wasn't just the kind of quiet that came with stunned disbelief. No, this was the kind of silence that made the air in the room heavy, suffocating. Brooks watched the whole exchange without blinking, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just about Naomi being underestimated. She was playing a game, one where Hayes was already losing. "I think someone made a mistake letting you in here," Hayes sneered. "This is a secure facility. SEAL operations only." Naomi didn't even flinch. Instead, she moved toward the door with a calm that bordered on unnerving, as if nothing had happened, as if this was just another day at the office. Behind her, Master Chief Brooks remained rooted to his spot. He hadn't spoken yet, but he could already tell. This was only the beginning. Naomi didn't hurry. She didn't need to. The room was now hers in a way that no one had anticipated. As she returned to her console, her movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. She tapped a few keys, the hum of the systems around her, the only sound. But it wasn't the equipment that had Brooks watching her intently now. It was the way she carried herself. She was still the same woman who had walked into this room, dismissed by the SEALs, laughed at by Hayes. But there was a shift in the air, something no one could ignore. Naomi was no longer just an outsider. As her fingers flew across the keys, Brooks found himself unable to tear his gaze away. He'd seen enough to know that she wasn't here by accident. The way she handled the tablet, with the precision of someone who had trained for this, was beyond the capacity of any civilian. It was military grade. She was moving too quickly and with too much authority to be anything less than what he suspected. She wasn't just a technician. She was trained. Special Forces trained. There was no mistaking it now. A shiver ran down his spine. She wasn't just here to manage systems. Naomi had a mission. The question was, what was it? From across the room, she typed a final command into the system before turning slowly to face him, her expression unreadable. Brooks had been around long enough to understand what a man like Hayes could never see, the subtle cues that spoke volumes. Naomi had it all. The discipline, the control, the quiet confidence of someone who had been through hell and come out stronger. "Is there something I can help you with, Master Chief?" she asked, her voice steady. The question hung in the air for a moment as Brooks considered his answer. He knew he had to tread carefully. She wasn't just some contractor. Not anymore. "You've been at this long enough for me to know," he said, his voice rough from years of shouting over the sound of engines, gunfire, and explosions. "But it's not just the way you handle the equipment. It's your posture, the way you stand, the way you breathe. You're a veteran, but not just any veteran. You've been trained for this." Naomi met his gaze without flinching, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She didn't answer him directly. Instead, she returned to her console, her fingers resuming their dance over the keys with practiced ease. "I've worked with similar systems before," she said quietly, without looking at him. Brooks' eyes narrowed as he processed her words. She wasn't saying it to boast. She wasn't saying it to provoke him. She was saying it because it was the truth. He had heard of these kinds of operations before, deep cover agents who infiltrated military units to find and neutralize threats from within. But this was different. Naomi was no mere infiltrator. She was the type of operative who understood the game better than most, and she had just proven it by not reacting to Hayes' taunts. She was already 5 steps ahead. Before Brooks could ask her anything further, the door to the control room opened, and in walked Lieutenant Ashton, a smug grin on his face as he approached Naomi. "Hey, Miss Consultant," he called, drawing her attention. "How about we wrap this up, huh? Admiral's orders. You're not authorized to this terminal during operational hours." Naomi glanced up at him, her eyes cold as she stood from her seat. She gave him no response at first. The same calm certainty she had shown since walking in was still in place. She didn't argue. "I'll be finished in about 20 minutes, Naomi said, her voice measured and cool, without even a trace of concern. Ashton's grin faltered. "Well, operational hours started at 0600, so I'll finish in 20 minutes, she repeated. No more, no less. The sheer nonchalance in her voice made Ashton hesitate. Naomi wasn't the type to engage in petty arguments. She wasn't about to justify herself to someone like him. She simply did what was necessary. And at that moment, her focus shifted away from Ashton as if he wasn't even there. He stepped back, muttering something under his breath, as Naomi returned to her station. Brooks couldn't help but smile to himself as the lieutenant shuffled away. He had to admit, Naomi wasn't the woman he'd expected when she first walked to the door. There was more to her than anyone could have guessed. The morning carried on with a tension that no one could put into words. The SEALs and officers continued their routines, but the sense of unease that had taken root in the control room lingered. Naomi's presence was like a shadow they couldn't shake, subtle but undeniable. Master Chief Brooks remained by the door, pretending to review maintenance logs, though his mind never left Naomi. She had become the center of his thoughts. The way she moved, the way she spoke. Every detail about her seemed to demand closer inspection, but there was something deeper that Brooks couldn't put his finger on. Naomi wasn't just an operator in disguise. She was playing a game that everyone around her was too blinded by ego to see. He watched as she sat at the console, fingers poised over the keyboard, still engaged in her diagnostic routines. There was a purpose to her actions that went beyond maintenance. Naomi wasn't fixing broken equipment. She was securing it, building something from the inside out. It wasn't until he noticed the way her eyes flicked briefly to the security monitors that the realization hit him. Naomi wasn't just here to observe. She was building a map, mapping them. Naomi's eyes darted to a screen in the corner of the room, a data flow report she'd pulled up just a moment ago. Brooks had seen it too, but he hadn't reacted. He'd learned long ago to spot the little discrepancies that others missed, and this wasn't something he'd seen before. Naomi wasn't just processing logs. She was tracking every interaction, every access point, every anomaly in the system. At that moment, something shifted inside Brooks. There was no longer any doubt in his mind. She wasn't just here for technical support. She was hunting something or someone, and all this time, the SEALs, Hayes, even himself, had been playing into her plan without realizing it. Behind him, Lieutenant Ashton hovered, watching Naomi with a mix of confusion and growing unease. It was clear the tension was building between him and Naomi, but what Ashton didn't realize was that Naomi had already won. She had moved past him, past the petty games and petty insults. She was in control, and everyone else was scrambling to catch up. "Lieutenant Ashton," Naomi's voice cut through the tension like a sharp knife. He turned to look at her, his face hardening at her calm demeanor. "Why are you still here?" "I thought you had an assignment to report to," Naomi asked with raised brow, her voice steady but not unkind. Ashton's face reddened, and for a brief moment he hesitated. He wasn't sure what game she was playing, but he knew that whatever it was, she was playing it better than anyone else. With a sharp nod, Ashton turned and exited the room without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Now alone with Brooks, Naomi finally looked up, catching his eyes. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. She knew he was watching her. She didn't mind. In fact, she seemed to expect it. Brooks cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "You're not just here to monitor systems, are you?" Naomi didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, as though considering whether to share anything at all. The quietness between them was charged with 1,000 unspoken words. But then, with a subtle smile, she replied, her tone carrying the weight of someone who had lived a lifetime of secrets. "Let's just say I've been tasked with a different kind of mission." At that moment, the air shifted again. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Brooks' instincts flare to life. He didn't know what she was up to, but whatever it was about to change everything. As Naomi returned her attention to the screen, something shifted in the air. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a new set of commands appearing as if they had been waiting for her. Brooks stepped closer, the faintest edge of urgency creeping into his voice. "Who's the target?" he asked quietly, his eyes scanning the screen. His voice was rough, like someone who had been in the field too long, and was beginning to sense that the clock was ticking. Naomi met his gaze for a heartbeat. Her eyes were cold, focused, but there was a flicker of something else there. She didn't need to say it. He already knew. The target wasn't some rogue contractor or an enemy agent. The target was someone inside. Someone who was feeding secrets to the wrong hands. Someone who had been using their position for personal gain, and Naomi was closing in on them. The realization hit Brooks like a punch in the gut. Naomi wasn't just here for the operation. She was here to expose the very people who had been pulling the strings. And worse, they had no idea that they were already being hunted. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew thicker. Every word, every breath between them seemed to carry the weight of something larger, something dangerous. And just as Brooks was about to ask Naomi where she was going with this, she looked up, her expression unreadable. "Your admiral?" Naomi asked, her voice cold, distant. "I think we both know where this is headed." Naomi didn't wait for Brooks to respond. She didn't need to. The control room had already become a stage for a show none of them fully understood yet. And the game was shifting. Brooks' mind raced. He could sense the shift in Naomi. The calm, controlled demeanor wasn't just a front. It was a mask hiding the depths of her mission. It wasn't just about proving herself to Hayes, or even the SEALs. This was something much bigger, something far more dangerous. She had come here with a purpose that had only now started to reveal itself in pieces. "Brooks." Naomi's voice broke the silence, low and almost casual. "I think it's time we discuss your admiral." Her words hung in the air for a moment, heavy and deliberate. Something inside Brooks twisted. He had spent enough time in the Navy to know the unspoken truths, the secrets that lingered just beneath the surface. But nothing had prepared him for what Naomi was hinting at. She wasn't just talking about Admiral Hayes' arrogance. She was talking about something far darker. "Your admiral's hands aren't clean," Naomi continued, her gaze unwavering as she typed a series of commands into the system. "I've been tracking his movements for weeks now. It's not just the data leaks. It's more than that. It's corruption at the top." Brooks felt the blood drain from his face. His heart skipped a beat as the implication of her words began to sink in. He had suspected something, but this? It was far beyond anything he'd imagined. Admiral Hayes was the kind of officer who ran things with an iron fist. But Naomi was telling him that his boss, the man who held the power of the entire base in his hands, was involved in something far worse. Naomi's fingers moved effortlessly across the keyboard as she pulled up a series of encrypted files. Her screen flickered briefly, and then the information began to unfold. A map of data, timestamps, files that should never have been accessed, all linked to Hayes. And then Naomi pulled up a hidden server log. Brooks felt his stomach churn as he saw it. Hayes had been selling classified data to a private contractor, the same contractor who was connected to the very people Naomi was hunting. This wasn't just about military espionage. It was about high-level corruption that went all the way to the top, and it had been hiding in plain sight for months. Naomi leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on Brooks, the weight of her mission clear in her eyes. "I've already reported this. It's only a matter of time before the full investigation takes place. But I think we both know that when it does, Hayes won't be the only one exposed." Brooks didn't need to ask who else Naomi had been tracking. He already knew. It wasn't just Hayes. It was the whole network. Hayes was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and the truth was out there, waiting to be revealed. Before he could speak, the door swung open, and Lieutenant Ashton stepped back into the room. His usual cocky swagger was gone. Instead, he looked shaken. Naomi noticed a change instantly. Something had shifted in him, something he couldn't hide. "You're looking pale, Lieutenant." Naomi remarked dryly, her voice laced with an almost amused attachment. Something wrong? Ashton's eyes flickered to her, and for the first time, Naomi saw something other than the arrogance he usually wore like armor. There was fear there. He knew, just like everyone else, how fragile the situation was. It wasn't just about following orders anymore. This was about survival, and there was no one left to trust. "The Admiral, he wants to see you," Ashton said, his voice low, almost defeated. Naomi didn't move at first. She sat back, her fingers tapping lightly on the console, as if she hadn't just discovered the depth of Hayes' betrayal. "I'm sure he does," she replied with a soft smirk. Master Chief Brooks, who had been quietly absorbing the situation, finally spoke, his voice grim. "You know what happens now, right?" Naomi turned her gaze toward him, the same calculating look in her eyes. "It's already happening." Brooks nodded, his face hardening. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was a part of this, whether he liked it or not. And Naomi had made sure he understood that. The door swung open again, and Lieutenant Ashton stepped back, making way for the man they'd all been dreading. Admiral Hayes strode into the room, his presence commanding as ever. But this time, something was different. There was a shift in the way he moved, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes that no one had ever seen before. "You think you got this all figured out, don't you?" Hayes asked Naomi, his voice low and dangerous. Naomi didn't flinch. She stood slowly, her posture unwavering. "No, Admiral, but I'm about to." And just like that, the tension in the room exploded. Hayes' face twisted in disbelief as Naomi's calm, deliberate movements betrayed a confidence he couldn't understand. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about taking down a system from the inside. The room went deathly silent. For the first time since Naomi walked in, Admiral Hayes seemed unsure of himself. His smirk faltered, replaced by something darker, something like desperation. Naomi's gaze never wavered from his. She could feel the shift in the air, the weight of it pressing down on her. This wasn't just another standoff. It wasn't just about military rank or who controlled the base. This was about a man who had spent decades climbing to the top, and now he was looking down into a pit he hadn't seen coming. "Why don't you explain yourself, Ms. Rivers?" Hayes growled, stepping forward. His voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness like a whip. "I've seen all kinds of troublemakers, but I didn't think you'd be one of them." Naomi stood tall, unaffected by his fury. "The real troublemaker is you, Admiral," she replied coolly, her word precise and measured. "You've been selling classified data to private contractors, and you've been doing it for months." There was a beat of silence. Then the door to the control room slammed open, and Master Chief Brooks stepped in, his expression grim. He'd been watching from the sidelines for long enough. It was time to take a stand. Brooks said, his voice low, but filled with the weight of someone who had seen enough. "It's over." The tension was thick in the air. Hayes' eyes flickered between Naomi and Brooks, as if trying to figure out his next move. But something was shifting. There was no denying it now. Naomi had already won. The evidence was irrefutable. "You think you can just walk in here and accuse me?" Hayes snarled, but there was a crack in his voice now, something vulnerable that hadn't been there before. "I don't think," Naomi replied. "I know." With a flick of her wrist, Naomi pulled up the encrypted data on the screen. The logs, the timestamps, the proof. It was all there, laid out in front of them. She turned the screen towards Hayes, allowing him to see the damning evidence for himself. His face drained of color as he read through it. Hayes couldn't deny it any longer. His name was all over these files, every transaction, every access point, every secret he had sold. The room stood still, but the tension was alive in the air. And then, as the gravity of the situation settled over him, Hayes' defiance began to crumble. Brooks stepped forward, locking eyes with Naomi. "This goes higher than just him, doesn't it?" Naomi didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The silence in the room spoke volumes. This wasn't just about one corrupt officer. This was a network, a conspiracy that went all the way to the top, and Hayes was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. "We've been watching for months," Naomi finally said, her voice steady. Hayes isn't the only one. There are others pulling the strings behind the scenes. People you trust, people you thought you knew. At that moment, the door opened again and a new figure stepped into the room. Lieutenant Ashton was back, but now there was no bravado in his step. His eyes were wide, his body rigid with tension. "Admiral," Ashton said, his voice shaky, "there's a team coming in, and they're not here to congratulate you." Naomi looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She could tell by the way he spoke that something had shifted in him. The lieutenant wasn't just a pawn anymore. He had witnessed the truth, and now he had to choose a side. Before anyone could respond, the door behind him swung open again. This time, it wasn't just a few junior officers. 4 generals walked into the room, their heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. The weight of their presence was undeniable. These were the men and women who held the real power. The lead general, a woman with silver hair and eyes like flint, surveyed the room with an expression that read like a professional's judgment. She didn't need to say a word. The others followed her in, standing at attention, their faces hard and unforgiving. Naomi didn't flinch. She stood her ground, just as she had when she first walked in. She wasn't the coffee girl anymore. She was Naomi Rivers, and she had just exposed the lies. "Admiral Hayes," the general's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You are hereby placed under arrest for unauthorized disclosure of classified information and conspiracy to commit espionage." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Naomi had known this moment was coming, but seeing Hayes, once a towering figure of power, begin to crumble in front of everyone was something else entirely. The air in the room was thick with disbelief. No one had expected this. Not like this. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. One of the generals stepped forward, eyes locked on Naomi. She recognized the look in his eyes. Respect. "You've done more than just expose a few bad apples, Commander Rivers," he said. "You've torn down an entire network. And for that, you have our respect." Naomi nodded once, slowly, her eyes never leaving the general's. She wasn't looking for validation. She had done her job. And now, it was time to finish what she started. "Where's Corbin?" the general asked, his tone darkening. Naomi didn't hesitate. "He's already gone. He knew this was coming. He's been hiding in plain sight for far too long." With a quick nod, the general motioned for the MPs to move in. Hayes was cuffed and let out, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. As they walked past Naomi, Hayes shot her one last look, a look that was full of questions he would never get answers to. Naomi watched him go, but her gaze shifted quickly to the task ahead. There was still work to do. The network wasn't finished yet, but this was the beginning of the end. The moment Hayes was escorted from the room, a deep silence fell over the control room. The air was thick with disbelief, but beneath the shock was something else, relief. Naomi's work wasn't finished, but she had just taken down the heart of the operation, the person pulling the strings. The remaining generals and officers filed into the room, their faces somber and reflective, but there was a sense of purpose in their eyes. General Flores, who had led the team into the room, surveyed the evidence with an intensity that made Naomi's skin prickle. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she had uncovered. "Commander Rivers," General Flores began, her voice steady and commanding. "You've done something most people would never even attempt. You've exposed a network that has been bleeding this institution dry. You've done more than your duty. You've saved lives, and you've saved this base." Naomi didn't answer right away. The compliment hung in the air like an unspoken truth. Something she knew, something she had already accepted. She wasn't here for the praise. She was here to ensure that justice was served. "I didn't do it alone," Naomi replied quietly. Her gaze flickered briefly to Master Chief Brooks, who was still standing by the door, observing her with a sense of silent respect. He had been the one to recognize the signs, to see beyond her civilian facade and understand what she was capable of. He had trusted his instincts, and for that, Naomi would always be grateful. General Flores nodded, acknowledging Naomi's words, before turning her attention back to the screen. "We need to finish this," she said. "The investigation is just beginning, and we've got a long way to go." Naomi nodded in agreement. There was so much more to uncover, so many layers of corruption to peel back. But this was the beginning of something bigger, a chance to clean house, to bring real justice to the people who had been betraying the very system they swore to protect. As the generals continued to discuss the next steps, Naomi found herself drifting out of the conversation, her mind already focused on the road ahead. She could feel the weight of the mission pressing on her, the sense of unfinished business gnawing at her. There were still those in the shadows, still those pulling strings, and Naomi had no intention of letting them slip through her fingers. The door to the control room opened again, and in stepped Lieutenant Ashton, looking more worn than before. His face was pale, his eyes searching Naomi's with an air of uncertainty. "I owe you an apology," Ashton said quietly, his voice almost hesitant. "I was part of the problem. I didn't see it. I didn't understand." Naomi studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. She hadn't expected him to come back, let alone admit his role in everything that had happened. But here he was, standing before her, a man humbled by the truth. "People make mistakes," Naomi replied, her voice calm but firm. "What matters is what you do after. The next time you see someone who doesn't fit the mold, don't dismiss them. Ask questions. Don't assume." Ashton nodded, his gaze shifting to the floor, his shoulders slumped in shame. But there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes, something that told Naomi he had learned more than just a lesson about her. He had learned something about himself. Before he could speak again, General Flores stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We got work to do. All of you. This isn't over." Naomi turned her attention back to the generals, who were now focused on their next steps. She had done her part. Now it was time to step back and let the system do the rest. But before she left the room, she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Brooks. "You did good," he said gruffly, his voice rough with the weight of 1,000 untold stories. "We all knew something was off, but you brought the truth to light, and for that, you've got my respect." Naomi didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just nodded, a subtle acknowledgement that spoke volumes. As she stepped out of the room, the weight of everything she had uncovered settled on her shoulders. There would be more to uncover, more to fight for, but for tonight, she allowed herself to breathe, to be still. Tomorrow was another day, another mission, another ghost to hunt. The halls of the base were quieter now, the buzz of activity replaced by an eerie calm. Naomi walked with purpose, each step carrying her further from the shadows and into the light of justice. She had won, but the war was never truly over. Naomi walked down the narrow hallway, the echo of her footsteps the only sound in the otherwise silent base. She didn't look back. There was no need. She had done what she came here to do, expose the corruption, taken down the people who thought they were untouchable, and now it was time to let the wheels of justice turn. Her body ached from the weight of the mission, the tension, the hours of hiding in plain sight, of maintaining a false identity, of becoming someone else when she had to. But now, as she walked past the door to the control room one last time, Naomi knew she was stepping into something new. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her thoughts. She pulled it out, her eyes scanning the message that had just arrived. "Tower 4 sends regards." She froze. The message was cryptic, unsettling. Naomi didn't need to open the attachment to know what it was. The same type of image she'd seen before, the same haunting image that still lingered in her mind from a mission in Syria. Her convoy's route, marked in red. The kill zone she'd walked right into. And the figure, distant, hidden, watching, waiting. Someone had known the attack was coming. Someone had set them up. Her fingers tightened around the phone as she walked faster now, moving with purpose. She had no time to waste on reflections. No time to dwell on the victories she had already secured. There was still one last thread to pull, one last piece of the puzzle to fit into place. As she entered her quarters, she didn't bother to sit down. She didn't waste any time. There was no need for relaxation. She had a job to finish, a war to keep fighting. She opened her encrypted storage and brought up the image from Tower 4. This time, she opened the attachment, her eyes scanning the details quickly. The coordinates from 2 years ago, the red path, the kill zone. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, the figure watching from the rooftop. Naomi's mind raced. She'd been hunting a ghost. But it wasn't just any ghost. It was someone who thought they were hidden. Someone who thought they were safe because they had covered their tracks so well. That figure? They were still out there, still operating. Naomi stared at the image for a long moment, her mind piecing the fragments together. She was no longer just an operator, no longer just a contractor playing by the rules. She was something else now, something more dangerous, someone who could move through shadows and bring the light with them. The door to her room clicked open. Naomi didn't turn. She didn't need to. "Naomi," came the voice from behind her. It was Lieutenant Ashton, standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes still wide with the weight of everything he had learned today. "I came to apologize," Ashton said quietly, "for everything, for the jokes, for the assumptions. I didn't see it, but I should have. I see it now, and I wanted you to know that I—" Naomi cut him off, turning slowly to face him. She met his eyes, her expression unreadable, but her voice was firm, unwavering. "Next time you see someone who doesn't fit the mold, Lieutenant, don't assume. Don't judge. Ask questions." Ashton nodded, his posture stiff. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't need anything more. He'd learned his lesson, and for now that was enough. Naomi returned to the table, her fingers lightly tapping against the edge as she prepared for what came next. The war didn't stop. It never did. And she wasn't done yet. She sat down, the small but heavy weight of her watch resting on her wrist, the button she hadn't pressed. Yet, the one that would change everything again, the one that would force the hand of those still hiding in the dark. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new ghosts to hunt. But for tonight, Naomi took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, letting the silence wrap around her. For now, the mission was complete. The ghosts were beginning to stir. But Naomi Rivers wasn't finished yet. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed today's story, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, so you never miss another pulse-pounding cinematic tale from Black Rise. Here's a quick question for you. If you were in Naomi's shoes, would you have been able to trust yourself, or would you have doubted everything just like everyone else did? Sometimes justice isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, calculated, and patient. But when it comes, it shakes everything to its core.